It started with a knock on the door. Not the casual rap of a neighbor borrowing sugar or the friendly thud of the mailman delivering a package. No, this was deliberate, calculated. A knock that made my pulse quicken before I even crossed the living room. When I opened the door, I found myself staring at a man I'd never seen before. Late 30s, average height, dark hair slicked back like he'd stepped out of a noir film. He wore a suit too sharp for our suburban neighborhood, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who knew too much. "Are you Ethan Gray?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "Yeah, and you are?" I replied cautiously, gripping the door handle a little tighter. "I think you should sit down." The words sent a shiver down my spine, but I didn't move. He reached into his pocket, pulling out an envelope. No badge, no ID, just a plain white envelope with my name scrawled on it. "This will explain everything," he said, handing it to me. "I'm sorry to be the one to bring this to you." Before I could ask what the hell was going on, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving me standing in the doorway. I tore the envelope open as soon as the car disappeared down the street. Inside were a few folded sheets of paper, printed emails, and photos. Photos of Claire. Photos of her with another man. Not just any man, but someone I recognized, a co-worker she had mentioned in passing once or twice. A team leader at her office, the kind of guy whose name I only remembered because she had laughed at his terrible jokes during dinner one night. The pictures weren't explicit, not at first. They were taken at a distance, her leaving a restaurant, him opening the car door for her. But as I flipped through, they became harder to ignore, a stolen kiss in a parking lot, their hands intertwined as they walked into a hotel lobby. The emails were worse. Printed threads of late-night messages, some teasing, some affectionate, and others that left no room for doubt. My stomach twisted as I skimmed the words. Words that turned my wife, the mother of my children, into a stranger. I stood there in the doorway for what felt like hours, the world spinning around me. This wasn't how betrayal was supposed to look. I always thought it would come with screaming fights, obvious signs, or a slow realization. Instead, it came quietly, delivered in an unmarked envelope, by a stranger who knew more about my marriage than I did. The house was eerily silent when I finally stepped back inside. The kids were at my sister's for the weekend, and Claire was out, supposedly at a late meeting. My hands trembled as I set the papers on the dining table and stared at them, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a violation. I sat at the dining table for what felt like hours, the papers spread before me like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Each photo, each email, whispered a truth I wasn't ready to hear. The silence of the house was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. The mundanity of the sound contrasted sharply with the chaos in my mind. Claire wasn't home yet. Her meeting had stretched late into the night, and for the first time, I wondered where she really was. I glanced at the clock, 10:14 p.m. Too late for a meeting, but not too late for whatever she was actually doing. My jaw clenched as I stared at the picture of her holding hands with him, her smile so carefree it was like the life we had built didn't even exist. This wasn't just an affair. This was something deliberate. Coordinated. I didn't know what was worse, the betrayal itself or the effort she'd put into hiding it. I couldn't sit still. I needed more. I couldn't confront her without knowing everything. I grabbed my keys and headed out, the envelope tucked under my arm like some grim talisman. My first stop was the office of the private investigator whose name was stamped on the back of one of the photos. The address led me to a nondescript building in a commercial strip. The lights were still on, and through the glass door, I could see the investigator, the same man who had handed me the envelope, sitting behind a cluttered desk. When I pushed the door open, he looked up, unsurprised. "I thought you'd come back," he said. I dropped the envelope onto his desk, the contents spilling out. "What the hell is this? Why did you bring it to me?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I was hired to investigate. Once I found enough, I was asked to make sure you saw it." "Who hired you?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The man who hired me doesn't want his name involved." He suspected his wife was having an affair with your wife. He wanted proof, and when I found it, he thought you had a right to know. The room seemed to tilt. His wife? Yeah, he said, sliding a printout toward me. It was an email exchange, not between Claire and her lover, but between the lover and his wife. A message thread where the wife confronted her husband about suspicious behavior. Her accusations were met with gaslighting and denials until she hired the investigator. You're telling me this is a love triangle? I said, my voice cold. He nodded. It gets worse. He reached into a drawer and pulled out another folder. Inside were more photos, bank statements, and receipts. My wife and her lover had been using a joint account to cover their escapades. Hotels, dinners, gifts. The kind of expenses that didn't show up on our shared budget. I stared at the evidence, the rage in me swelling to something almost uncontainable. How long has this been going on? 6 months, give or take, he said. But there's something else you should know. The guy, he's planning to leave his wife. And from what I've seen, your wife is planning to leave you. The words hit me harder than any punch. Leave me? After 12 years, 2 kids, a life we had built together, she was planning to walk away? Without a word, without a warning? I left the office in a daze, my mind racing. Back in my car, I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, trying to process everything. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I drove aimlessly for a while, replaying every interaction I'd had with Claire over the past year. The late meetings, the sudden work trips, the unexplained absences, it all made sense now. Around midnight, I found myself parked outside a small cafe that stayed open late. I went inside, ordered a coffee I didn't really want, and sat in the corner booth. The coffee was bitter, but it grounded me. I needed to think. If she was planning to leave, why hadn't she said anything? Did she think I wouldn't find out? Or was she just waiting for the right moment to blindside me? The questions piled up, and each one stoked the fire inside me. At 1:30 a.m., I drove back home. Claire's car was in the driveway, and the lights in the living room were on. I stepped inside to find her curled up on the couch, her laptop open, and a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up, startled. You're home late, she said casually, as if nothing was wrong. I could say the same about you, I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. She frowned. I told you, I had a late meeting. I stared at her, my heart pounding. The lies came so easily to her. Did you get everything done? Yeah, she said, her tone clipped. It was a long night. I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm. Good. Long nights are productive. She didn't catch the edge in my voice. Instead, she closed her laptop and stood. I'm exhausted. I'm heading to bed. I watched her walk away, the rage inside me boiling over. But I stayed silent. I needed more. Confronting her now would only let her cover her tracks. I needed to catch her off guard. And when I did, she wouldn't see it coming. The next day began like any other. Claire moved around the house with her usual efficiency, getting ready for work while I pretended to scroll through emails at the dining table. Every movement she made, every word she said, felt like a performance. I watched her, searching for cracks, some sign that she was struggling under the weight of her lies. But if she felt any guilt, it didn't show. When she kissed me on the cheek before leaving, I almost flinched. I managed a tight smile, but the second the door closed, I grabbed my phone and called the private investigator. I need everything, I said. Every detail. Bank statements, phone records, whatever you can get. And I need it by tonight. He agreed, and by evening, I had a thick envelope waiting for me at his office. It felt heavy in my hands, not just because of its contents, but because of what it represented. Proof. Irrefutable evidence of Claire's betrayal. That night, when she walked through the door, I was ready. Hey, she said, setting her bag down on the counter. How was your day? Busy, I replied, my voice calm. Yours? Same, she said. I'm going to take a quick shower before dinner. Don't, I said sharply. She froze, turning to look at me. What? Sit down, Claire. We need to talk. Her face tightened. Can it wait? I've had a long day. No, I said, cutting her off. It can't. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into one of the dining chairs. I sat across from her, the envelope resting on the table between us. What's this about? She asked, her voice wary. You tell me, I said, sliding the envelope toward her. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to me. What is this? Open it, I said. She stared at me for a moment, then picked up the envelope and pulled out its contents. As she flipped through the photos and emails, her face went pale. Where did you get these? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That doesn't matter, I said. What matters is that they're real. And you're going to tell me the truth. She set the papers down, her hands trembling. Ethan, I can explain. Don't, I snapped. Don't insult me with excuses. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. 6 months, she admitted. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of sneaking around behind my back. The weight of it hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let her see how much it hurt. Why? I demanded. Was it me? Was I not enough for you? It's not like that, she said, her voice cracking. It's not about you. Not about me? I said, my voice rising. Then what is it about, Claire? Because it sure as hell looks like you decided our life together wasn't enough for you. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said, tears streaming down her face. It just happened. Bullshit, I said. You don't accidentally sneak around with another man for 6 months. You don't accidentally use a secret bank account to fund your little escapades. This wasn't a mistake, Claire. This was a choice. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I'm sorry, she choked out. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You did. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. I stared at her, waiting for her to say something, anything that could make sense of what she had done. But she just sat there, crying into her hands. I want to know one thing, I said finally. Were you planning to leave me? She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I don't know, she whispered. You don't know? I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. So, what? You were just going to keep stringing me along while you played house with him? It's not like that, she said, her voice shaking. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. I laughed bitterly. Well, let me make it easy for you, Claire. This marriage is over. Her eyes widened. Ethan, please. No, I said, standing up. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I turned and walked away, her sobs echoing behind me. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a hollow sense of relief. It was over. And now, it was time to figure out what came next. After the confrontation, I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours pacing the living room, running my hands through my hair, trying to process what had just happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photos, read the emails, heard her weak excuses replaying in my head. The betrayal burned like acid, and I knew I couldn't just let it slide. By dawn, I had a plan. Claire was still upstairs, likely crying herself to sleep in our bedroom. I hadn't gone back up after leaving her at the dining table. I didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear her voice, didn't even want to share the same air. I grabbed my laptop and started laying the groundwork for what needed to be done. The first step was securing myself legally. I emailed my lawyer, explaining the situation in blunt terms. I needed to ensure my finances, assets, and custody rights for our 2 kids were protected. While I had been the one working from home and taking care of most of their day-to-day needs, Claire's income technically contributed more. I knew this could be a battle, so I wanted to be prepared. After that, I started gathering every piece of evidence I had. I scanned the emails, the photos, and the bank statements. I cataloged every detail, every date, and every dollar. I wasn't just preparing for a divorce, I was preparing to make sure Claire felt the consequences of her choices. Around 9 a.m., I heard her footsteps upstairs. She was moving quietly, probably hoping to avoid me. Good. That suited me just fine. I didn't want to talk to her yet. I had bigger things to do. I sent a message to the private investigator, asking if he had any additional material. He replied within minutes, confirming he had more photos and even some video footage. I told him to send everything to my lawyer. The thought of what else might be on those files made my stomach churn, but I needed to stay focused. By midday, I had shifted my attention to her social life. Claire was active on social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and she had always been careful to curate an image of a happy, successful wife and mother. I spent hours combing through her accounts, saving every post, every photo, every comment that painted a picture of a woman who valued family above all else. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wasn't planning to air her dirty laundry online, not yet, anyway. But I wanted to be ready if she tried to spin the narrative. If she decided to play the victim, to claim the moral high ground, I would have the receipts to prove otherwise. The real revenge started that evening. When Claire finally came downstairs, her eyes were red and puffy. She looked at me hesitantly, like she wasn't sure if she should speak. I didn't give her the chance. "You're not staying here tonight," I said flatly. She blinked. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "Pack a bag and go." "I don't care where, but you're not staying in this house." "Ethan, this is my home too," she said, her voice trembling. "Not anymore," I said. "Not after what you've done." She hesitated, looking like she wanted to argue, but then she nodded and turned back upstairs. I followed her, making sure she only packed what she needed for a few days. As she zipped up her suitcase, I could see the panic in her eyes. She wasn't used to me being this cold, this firm. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked as she wheeled the suitcase toward the door. "I don't care," I said. "Stay with him, for all I care." She flinched, then walked out without another word. As soon as she was gone, I called my best friend, Matt. He was the only person I trusted to help me without asking too many questions. Within an hour, he was at my house, and we started packing up Claire's belongings. I didn't just want her out of the house. I wanted her out of my life. We worked late into the night, boxing up her clothes, her books, her decorations, everything that was hers. I made sure to leave her essentials, but nothing more. When Matt asked if I was sure about this, I nodded without hesitation. "This isn't just about me," I said. "This is about the kids. They deserve better than a mother who lies and cheats." By the time we finished, the house looked emptier, but it also felt lighter. I emailed Claire to let her know her things would be delivered to her office the next day. I didn't want her setting foot in the house again. The next step was professional. Claire's company had a strict policy against relationships between employees, especially those involving a superior and a subordinate. Her lover was her team leader, which meant their affair violated the company's code of conduct. I sent an anonymous tip to the company's HR department, attaching copies of the evidence. By the end of the week, both Claire and her lover were placed under investigation. I didn't know if they'd be fired, but at the very least, they'd be exposed. Finally, I contacted the wife of her lover, the woman who had hired the private investigator in the first place. I gave her copies of everything I had and told her to do with it what she thought best. She thanked me, her voice heavy with emotion. When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't joy, there was nothing joyful about any of this, but it was a grim kind of closure. Claire had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. I had no illusions about what lay ahead. Divorce, custody battles, the fallout with the kids, it was going to be a long, painful road. But for the first time in days, I felt like I was in control. And I wasn't going to let her take that away from me. A week passed before Claire reached out to me. During that time, the house was eerily quiet. The kids were staying with my sister to shield them from the chaos, and I spent most of my days preparing for the battles to come. My lawyer had already started the divorce proceedings, and the evidence I'd gathered ensured I had the upper hand. Still, the silence wasn't comforting, it was a reminder of everything that had been torn apart. Claire called me late one night, her name flashing on my phone screen like a ghost from a life I no longer recognized. I debated whether to answer, but curiosity, or maybe a lingering sense of obligation, got the better of me. I picked up, my voice cold and detached. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice shaky. "In person." I hesitated. I didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear her excuses or apologies. But part of me wanted closure, wanted to see her face as she tried to explain the unexplainable. "Tomorrow," I said. 10 a.m. Here. She agreed, and the call ended. The next morning, I prepared for her arrival like I was preparing for war. I set up a recorder on the dining table, just in case. I didn't trust her not to twist my words later. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and opened the door. Claire stood there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes hung loosely on her frame. She was a far cry from the confident woman I had married, but I didn't let her appearance soften me. "Come in," I said curtly, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, her eyes darting around as if she expected the walls to collapse in on her. I led her to the dining table and motioned for her to sit. She hesitated before lowering herself into the chair. "So, talk," I said, crossing my arms. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them on the table. "Ethan, I..." "Stop," I said sharply. "No more excuses. No more lies. Just tell me why, Claire. Why did you do it?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. She had cried enough during the confrontation, and it hadn't changed anything. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know?" I said, my voice rising. "That's not good enough, Claire. You had 6 months to think about this. 6 months of lying, sneaking around, and betraying me. Don't sit there and tell me you don't know why." She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. "I was unhappy, Ethan," she said. "I felt trapped." "Trapped?" I repeated, the words stinging like a slap. "You had a husband who loved you, kids who adored you, and a life most people would kill for. What part of that felt like a prison to you?" She shook her head, her sobs making her words difficult to understand. "I don't know. I felt like I was losing myself. Like I wasn't Claire anymore. I was just your wife, their mom, the person who kept everything running. And he made me feel seen." Her words cut deeper than I expected. The idea that I had somehow failed her, that I hadn't noticed her slipping away, was a wound I hadn't prepared for. But I didn't let it show. "So, your solution was to blow up our marriage?" I said bitterly. "To destroy everything we built together for some guy who made you feel seen?" She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. "But it did," I said. "And now you have to live with the consequences." She looked up then, her eyes desperate. "Ethan, please. I know I've made mistakes, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family." I stared at her, the words sounding so hollow after everything she had done. "You already lost me, Claire," I said quietly. "The moment you decided to cheat, you ended our marriage. This isn't something we can come back from." "But we can try," she said, her voice breaking. "We can go to counseling, work through this." "No," I said firmly. "You had a chance to fix this before it got to this point. You could have talked to me, told me how you were feeling. But instead, you chose to betray me. There's no coming back from that." She broke down completely then, her sobs echoing through the house. I watched her, feeling a strange mixture of pity and anger. This was the woman I had loved for over a decade, the mother of my children. But now, she was just someone I used to know. "I'll make this simple," I said when her sobs subsided. "I've already filed for divorce. The kids will stay with me, and you'll get visitation. You can fight it if you want, but I have enough evidence to make sure the court sees things my way." She looked up at me, her face pale. "Ethan, please. This isn't up for debate," I said. "You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine." For a moment, I thought she might argue, but she simply nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She stood slowly, wiping her tears as she moved toward the door. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Goodbye, Claire," I replied, my tone cold. When the door closed behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. I sat down at the dining table, staring at the empty seat where she had just been. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't oppressive, it was peaceful. Claire was gone, and so was the weight of her betrayal. After Claire left, the house seemed to exhale with relief. The air felt lighter, the silence no longer suffocating but calm, like the aftermath of a storm. I sat at the dining table, staring at the evidence of our shattered life, legal papers, photos, emails, and receipts that now served as the roadmap to a new chapter. It wasn't the future I had envisioned, but it was the one I was forced to face. The first order of business was the kids. They were still at my sister's, shielded from the immediate fallout, but I knew they couldn't stay there forever. I called my sister and arranged to bring them home the following weekend. She asked the questions I had been avoiding. "What are you going to tell them? How much do they need to know?" The answers weren't simple. I wanted to protect them, but I also believed they deserved the truth, at least, a version of it that wouldn't destroy their image of their mother. When I finally picked them up, I sat them down in the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. "I need to talk to you both about something important," I began. "Your mom and I, we're not going to be together anymore." Their faces fell, confusion and fear flickering in their eyes. My son, who had just turned 11, was the first to speak. "Are you getting a divorce?" "Yes," I said, keeping my tone calm. "It's not because of anything you did, and it's not because we don't love you. Your mom and I we have problems we can't fix." "Is Mom okay?" my daughter asked, her voice small. "She's okay," I assured her. "And she loves you both very much. You'll still see her, but for now, you'll be living with me." They didn't cry, but their silence spoke volumes. It was the kind of heartbreak you can't put into words, and it tore at me in ways I hadn't expected. I spent the rest of the evening reassuring them, promising that their lives wouldn't change too much, even though I knew they already had. The following days were a blur of adjustments. Claire called every evening to speak to the kids, and while I could see it comforted them, it also irritated me. She was still part of their lives, yet she felt like a stranger in mine. We communicated only through email or our lawyers, discussing custody schedules and property division with the cold efficiency of business transactions. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into work, taking on new clients and projects to keep my mind occupied. I tackled household tasks I had neglected, turning our home into a space that felt wholly mine. I even joined a local fitness group, something Claire had always encouraged but I'd never made time for. Through it all, the anger lingered, simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about the audacity. She had taken our life, our marriage, and our family and gambled it all for something fleeting. Even as I tried to move forward, the bitterness threatened to pull me back. Then, about a month after the confrontation, Claire asked to meet. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a park we had taken the kids to many times. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near the playground. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down, keeping a safe distance between us. "What do you want, Claire?" I asked, my tone weary. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice hesitant. "About everything. About what I did, and what it cost." I didn't respond, waiting for her to get to the point. "I know I can't undo what I've done," she continued. But I want you to know. I'm sorry. For all of it. Her apology hung in the air, fragile and insufficient. I looked at her, searching for sincerity, and for the first time, I saw it. She wasn't trying to manipulate me or justify her actions, she was just a broken person acknowledging the destruction she had caused. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. Not now, maybe not ever. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I understand. I just needed to say it. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. How are the kids? She asked. They're adjusting, I said. They miss you. I miss them too, she said, her voice breaking. I hate that I've hurt them. They'll be okay, I said, more for myself than for her. We talked for a while longer, mostly about the kids and the logistics of co-parenting. When she left, I felt lighter, not because I had forgiven her, but because I had finally released the anger I had been holding on to. In the weeks that followed, I found a strange sense of peace. The divorce was finalized, and the custody arrangement was formalized. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that revolved around the kids and the routines we had established. I won't pretend it was easy. There were moments when the pain came rushing back, when I questioned every decision I had made, when I missed the life we had before it all fell apart. But those moments became fewer and further between. What surprised me most was how much stronger I felt. For years, I had defined myself as Claire's husband, as part of a unit. But now, I was rediscovering who I was on my own. One night, as I sat on the couch watching TV, my daughter climbed into my lap. She wrapped her arms around me and rested her head on my chest. I love you, Dad, she said softly. I love you too, I replied, holding her close. In that moment, I realized something important. Claire's betrayal had broken our marriage, but it hadn't broken me. I was still here, still standing, still fighting for the people who mattered most. And that was enough.